Hello, everyone. Welcome to Valley Sports Rewind. I'm Mike Cannici, and today we have a very special guest. He is the voice of Valley Sports Football, the legendary Ed Clements. And Ed, I want to thank you for coming on today.
You're quite welcome, Mike. Thanks for inviting me.
You know, Ed, it's hard to believe. I think you guys went off the air probably around 2007. It's hard to believe it's been, almost 10 years. Does it feel like it to you at all?
I don't know how it feels to tell you the truth. Just 1 year now as I'm getting older, it's just blending into another.
Right.
It's been a while, as you even know the time that we went off the air. Basically, you said 2006.
I think it was 2007, but either way,
sure,
it doesn't.
Sure. It's been a while.
Right. And, I know you guys began in 1984, so you're talking about 24 years of doing this. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is you get identified a lot with Valley High School sports, especially Cable 10. But your career actually started in broadcasting, doing radio. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Right. You were with, I believe, WADS?
WADS.
Right. Now, what year did that all begin for you, and how did that come about?
I'm not exactly. I know it was in the 70s.
Right.
Because what had happened is I had gone to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
Right.
And from there, I went to they secured the first job for me. I worked at a country western station in Hamden.
Oh, really? See, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I actually did the news there at I think I don't even know the call letters, but I do know I was there for some months, and then from there I took a tape. I had some on-air work. And I'm pretty sure I took a tape to Brad Harris, although I hadn't known Brad before that time.
Right.
Before that time, so I took it. And then I got my job with WADS. Always, it was a part-time job.
Right.
And I started in news, and it was. I can't actually tell you that. I know it was in the 70s. That's all I can tell. I can't pinpoint a year.
Right. Now, when would you say you started covering high school football? I know you did do play-by-play for quite a few years. Am I correct?
Correct. Well, I actually started, among the things I did at ADS, as I said, I did the news. Brad knew I was always interested in sports.
Right.
So, and Brad was doing the high school football games at that time.
Right.
And I was part of the team. And the reason they had me on the team was because Brad needed someone to read the commercial copy.
Right.
So I was on the team as just reading the commercials, and he knew all the time that I had the interest in sports, and that sort of dovetailed into doing some color commentating with Brad.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. Were you, at the time, a fan of high school sports?
Oh, definitely.
Yes.
Definitely.
So you had always had a passion for that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, you grew up in the Valley, Ansonia?
Correct.
Right. And you were an Ansonia graduate?
Right.
Right. So let me ask you this. I mean, we'll get into the TV part, but was it difficult in the beginning to call play-by-play doing it on the radio? Because, TV, they could kind of see what's going on, but radio, you really have to paint that picture, and that's not easy to do. I know a lot of people think it's easy to do, but, you really have to be on top of your game when you're doing play-by-play radio.
Right. Well, I can give you my first experience the first time I did a game, and actually it was a partial game because at that time I was still doing, the commercial copy for Brad. I don't know if you realize, Mike, but, on Saturdays, that's when we had all the teams were
right.
doing.
There were no lights.
No
back
lights.
then.
No
Yeah.
lights. We were doing a game up in Seymour, and Brad again had never heard me do play-by-play.
Right.
And now Brad had to go on to Shelton because Shelton was playing a later game. Now the game in Seymour was running late.
Right.
And I think it might have been about the third quarter. I can't be sure, but thereabouts, it was the third quarter of the game. Off mic, we went to a commercial break back at the studio.
Right.
And Brad basically says, "Are you ready? Are you ready?" He says I have to get the I have to get to Shelton. And I says, "Well, we're going to find out." But I was, and I've got to think, I'm sure that I would hope that there was never any tape made of that game because I was god awful.
Really?
But you get through it. You have the experience of doing it. And then shortly after, but I kept on work. I always try to imitate announcers on the radio. I try to hear what they were doing. I've
Right.
as I've always had the passion for sports, and so I knew all the top announcers and so forth. And I would try to copy Brad,
Right.
and what the kind of preparation Brad would do for the games. Sure, I made you're at a local radio station.
Right.
And you can make, as long as you do your preparation, you do your homework, you're terrible at the beginning, but you just progressively get better.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. You talked about listening to the different
Oh.
people on the radio. Was there anyone that stood out to you that, like, you emulated? I know you talked about Brad, but, like, any of the, bigger names?
Keith Jackson.
Right. Very good.
Dick Enberg.
Oh, phenomenal. Yeah.
At that time, Jimmy Nance, we're not talking about Jimmy Nance back then because
Right.
he comes later, I believe. Oh, and in base, and the interesting thing is, Mike, too, I feel that my best sport would have been doing baseball.
Right.
Because as a kid, I would take I didn't take a tape recorder to the Yankee games, but people did not want to sit next to me.
Right.
Because and I try to emulate the announcers, the Mel Allens, the Red Barbers.
Right.
So I think that, you get a feel for how to do play-by-play in first of all, it was a baseball setting. And I think I would have been very good at it, but it was the football that arose, and so that's what happens. You get identified with it, you get to do it. It's experience. It's learning by doing and making mistakes.
Right. Now, you said you weren't too good your first time.
Oh, it's terrible.
Did you go home that day saying, you know what, I'm just not good at this, or were you determined to get better and you didn't let that deteriorate?
Yeah, Brad was a great person to work for.
He was a great, he was so terrific for so many years.
I really enjoyed working for him because not only doing the play-by-play, but when I would as a fledgling newscaster, if I would make a mistake, if there was something about a pronunciation or something, the way he corrected you, I always appreciated the way he corrected me. And
right.
So he just brought me along slowly. I don't really know. I think I was saying, thank God I got through the first game.
Right.
I think that was my reaction, really.
Now, you had went to Connecticut School of Broadcasting. Was there a goal in mind that you had when you went there? Did you want to, you talked about baseball, you loved baseball. Mm-hmm. Did you want to be play-by-play? Did you want to do radio in some capacity? What was the goal for you? What did you want to do when you left?
Well, actually, the interesting thing is, before I went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, I thought it was pretty good.
Right.
Because here's this guy as a young kid who's been talking into a mic, and my parents had gotten me a reel-to-reel tape recorder. I've been always talking. But I was always getting, and I thought it was pretty good. I went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting because when I went to radio stations in the area, not only to WADS, but a couple stations, ELI in New Haven.
Right.
They wouldn't give me the time of day.
Oh, no. Huh?
So I didn't even have a tape. I came in, saying, well, I can do the job. That's when I decided, well, you know what? I think I'm pretty good. Let me go to Connecticut School of Broadcasting. And what the Connecticut School of Broadcasting did, because I was a little better than the rest of the class coming in,
right? I
think they worked with me more. And to promote their company, they were the ones that got me the first job.
I had went to Connecticut School of Broadcasting, and I always, while they did focus on TV, they were mainly known for radio.
Absolutely.
That's what they really prepared you for. So I think that was good. If you wanted to be in radio, they taught you. I mean, they don't teach you necessarily the rules and stuff, but they give you a lot of it. You come out of there with a lot more experience because time after time you're just in that studio, doing dry runs and stuff like that.
Here is the thing that really attracted me, and I'm not doing I'm not doing a spot for Connecticut School of Broadcasting. They're still very, very successful,
right?
As you know, I was impressed that they had the actual people in the field instructing you. The people that I had heard on the air, the famous Walt Dibble,
right? Yeah,
in the Hartford area. I mean, these were among my idols. Vinnie Roberts,
Right.
He'd been an air, at that time they called them not air personalities, they called them disc jockeys.
Right.
So these were the instructors, and I was fascinated by. I'll tell you what. The funny thing is, one of the first things we had to do, and Vinnie Roberts was the instructor. I don't want to get off too off topic here, but so I go in and do the first commercial, and and I could do a hard sell. It was a hard sell kind of a commercial, and I did it. But I used, instead of saying figure, I said figure.
Right.
And I'll never forget Vinnie Roberts just, correcting me afterwards. The rest of the classes say, wow, this guy, shows that he can do it or something like that. But no, it was that, it was the learning by doing. I mean, the instructors were just great.
Right.
And Dick Robinson, of course, who's still around.
Yeah.
Dick Robinson was the president of the company.
Right. Yeah, I think anybody that's trying to, have a career in this has to go to some type of broadcasting school. I mean, you do have the few. I mean, there's a couple that just, it falls in their lap sometimes, and, by chance they get a, great job. But usually you have to go to some type of broadcasting school because you think you're really good, but then, when you do go to one of these schools and you come out, you're like, wow, they taught me so much more and didn't realize.
It was a really good, I said, and I'm not trying to be a braggart, I said I knew I was good going in, but they taught me an awful lot. And they also, the other really good thing was I found that I had a lot of time to go down to their studio on my free time, Saturdays, because I was a full-time teacher.
Right.
And so what I did is Saturdays I would spend hours and hours down there.
Right.
So
Now let me ask you this. As time went on, I mean, how did you guys go about covering the games? I know Cable 10 picked the, select few games. They tried to, make sure every town was covered. But how did you guys go about picking these high school games each week on the radio side? I'm sure you guys covered Derby and Ansonia, obviously Seymour and Shelton. But how did you go about doing it?
Well, remember, first of all, Brad basically set the schedule.
Right.
But back then, of course, remember, we were all, I think, remember, all the Ansonia was playing, Derby, Shelton, not Seymour all the time.
Right.
Because they were in different leagues. I guess Brad basically handled that more because he knew more about the teams at the time. And, of course, he went with the big games, and he usually got the right kind of games to do.
Would you guys do a Thanksgiving game as
yes.
well? Yes.
Yes.
And how did you go about that? I know Cable 10 used to take turns.
Right. I'm not, my recollection there is not that clear as to how we went about it.
Right.
But,
the thing of it is high school sports back then especially, was so popular. I mean, you had to show up if it was a 10:30 game and it was Ansonia against Shelton.
9 o'clock, we're there.
Right. You got to be, and fans got there sometimes at 8:30 for parking issues and stuff like that. But it was so big back then. Do you look back at it and say, wow, I can't believe, local towns like this bring so many fans into the game. How did you feel about, the experience? And
I think it was just that was the time, Mike. It was just very normal.
Right.
There was no, that was just, remember, as growing up in Ansonia and knowing about the rivalries, it was just, there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. We just expected the huge crowds.
Right. Some of the things you see now too, Ed, which are kind of, they're disappointing because they were such a big part of the Valley, The Evening Sentinel closed down in the early 90s. WADS closed down eventually, I think in early 1991, something like that.
They were sold to the Spanish station.
Right. Why do you think some of this happened? Why do you think what happened? Were the times just changing too much? To me, when the Evening Sentinel closed its doors, that was the saddest day, I think, in the Valley.
I couldn't agree with you more. And, and I think about, as I'm getting older, I really think about all the great, the great outlets we had here.
Right.
And I'm looking at our studio right now. I'm looking at an old copy and reminiscing the Evening Sentinel.
Yeah.
Just such a great local paper. Now, when I was in high school, maybe in grammar school, I really didn't appreciate it that much. But then when you lose it, and of course the radio station.
Yeah.
And then also, let's talk about Derby and Ansonia. Look at the things we've lost in terms of the cultural centers, the theaters.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
I mean, again, in Derby,
you used to have Valley Bowl. You used to have the cinema and, Derby right over there. I mean, so many things just closed down. There was Bradley's. I mean, there were so many great places, and half that stuff is gone now. It's a shame.
I would like to reverse the clock or something like that. But and even right down here, in down here in Main Street, Ansonia, when you think about how beautiful the Capitol Theater was.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now you're too young. I mean,
right. But I've seen pictures.
Oh,
yeah.
The elegance inside.
Right.
But well.
Now, let me ask you this. You're from Ansonia, but you, as an announcer, have to cover different towns and things like that. So you can't be biased, or if people see that,
Correct.
You lose all your credibility.
Right.
How were you able to separate that? I mean, was it hard? I mean, because back then Ansonia was as good as any team. I mean, in the 70s, they were really starting to win championships, and you really couldn't be a fan. You had to be more of an announcer covering these teams.
Well, because you're representing. I'm representing all the schools, and you just can't. Yes, I'm a graduate of Ansonia High School, but I'm speaking to all the fans from all the communities. I want to be if you're a professional, you want to be a professional. You have to forget your past loyalties, and you're speaking to your audience.
Right. Exactly. Now, did you still kind of, I mean, you obviously covered them at times, Ansonia, but
Yes.
I mean, were you still a fan of Ansonia, or behind the scenes, or at that point you're so used to covering all these teams, you were just more of a fan of high school?
The only time I turned to be a fan, and this is for all the Valley schools, is when we entered the, and now you can't really be a homer.
Right.
But when we got into a playoff, let's say Derby was playing immaculate.
Right.
Now, come on, I want Derby to win.
Right.
Ansonia's playing New London.
You're rooting for Ansonia. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not. I mean, I hear some announcers. I'm horrified by some of the things I hear on the air today.
Right.
They make no bones about it.
Oh,
But
I know.
You have to have a degree of professionalism, because because you may have listeners outside the area too.
Oh yeah.
Well, you do have listeners or viewers outside the area. You just have to, if you want to be a true professional, if you want to work with all the coaches too, they have to know you as a straight arrow.
Right. And I think a lot of times too, when guys, and I get it, John Sterling covers the Yankees, Howie Rose covers the Mets,
Right.
Stuff like that. But sometimes you see too much of the homer in them, where they're cheering. And I get that, but if you ever listen to, say, Bob Murphy or Vin Scully, those type of guys, they, covered the teams, the Dodgers, the Mets, but they also were, straight and narrow. They gave credit to the other teams. I mean, nowadays, you see it all the time. I mean, I remember a playoff game between the Astros and the Cardinals. I remember Albert Pujols hit a big home run, and the Astro announcer's call on it was just god-awful because he was upset that, they were going to lose the game. You can't be that type of announcer.
Right. And you mentioned perhaps the greatest baseball announcer of all time, Vin Scully.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
he might be the greatest announcer in sports,
Correct,
period.
correct. And now, is this his last year or next year?
I had heard next year.
Next year.
Yeah, I had heard next year. And I mean, comes a time when everybody has to go, but
Right.
it'll be a sad day. It really will.
But his description of the game, he's a consummate pro.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Valley Sports Rewind with Mike Cannici on valleyindy.org and 103.5 FM, New Haven's community radio station.
Now, 1984 comes around, Ed, and you take your broadcasting career in a new direction to the TV side of things. You know what I find interesting is Cable 10, I think, had started in the 70s.
Right.
And the thing that's ironic is they, over the years, they had different announcers. I think the longest tenure of any announcing team they had might have been 4 years. You come in 1984 and you get teamed up with, a a guy who was a great football player in his own right in high school football, Buddy Chernovitz, who I believe was from Amity, from Bethany.
Right.
I know you two had done a Pop Warner game together,
Right.
so you kind of got to know each other before that. But you come in, how did Cable 10 come about, and describe, the relationship you and Buddy had over the years?
Here's my recollection. Here's what happened. And, and Buddy pretty much, when we did your Hometown Heroes show,
Right.
we pretty much, we agreed on the facts of, as to what happened. First of all, when Valley Cablevision decided that they were going to make a change in the announcing crew for football,
Right.
They called me in, and I had done some freelance work for them.
Right.
I had done one football game, I believe. I had done some softball,
Right.
boxing,
Wow.
and just a couple softball games
Right.
down at. Matter of fact, the softball games I did them down at Ryan Field.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Matter of fact, when I have a memory too of down there, they were playing one of the Valley, one of the very good Valley softball teams. Howie Dickerman was on the other team. I remember walking
Really?
with Howie.
Wow.
That goes way back, and we're talking years ago. Anyway, so I had done the freelance work. Valley Cable, they apparently liked what I did in that basis, so they called me in. John DeGarmo at the time was the head man in charge of doing the hiring, and
Right.
in charge of hiring. Liz Kennard came in 1 year later,
Right.
1985. But all right, anyway, so John sits me down, and they say, well, we're gonna offer you the job, and who do you? They actually threw out a couple of names. I won't mention the other names.
Right.
Well, who would you get to work? I says, well, wait a minute. I worked with John Buddy Chernovitz. And that was, that was one of the freelance jobs I did with them. That was the Pop Warner game.
Right.
And we really hit it off in that game. I says, well, I threw out Buddy's name, and they says, all right, we'll give it a go. So then they called. Obviously, the second meeting, they established the fact that I was going to do the play-by-play.
Right.
And it was a matter of just securing So they called in Buddy, who was really not that well, obviously not in the Valley, but New Haven area. John, he's like an institution.
Right. Right.
Notre Dame of West Haven, the whole, everyone loves him.
Right.
So we got together as a team. We met before John DeGarmo. I can throw out a couple of other names too of people that were really instrumental in getting us started. Mike Conroy.
Okay.
Mike Conroy was a big part of the. Harold Kramer was also a big part of the process. So there were a few of the executive people there. So that's how we got. So basically, we started, and we're as new hires, of course. I think we really had to be on top of our game, and I think we tried to be every week because remember, this is our first shot at doing television. Now, Buddy had said, I think Buddy might have done even some work in the past, maybe the radio side. I'm not sure of that.
Right.
But anyway, that's basically that was the start. Now, and at the very outset, and we didn't have the replay. The replay came in towards the latter half of that season.
Right.
So we just had the monitor, and there was no replay in the football game. So
Right.
But that's the genesis of how it developed.
And how would you, kind of say year one went with you two? I mean,
I thought it went great.
So, because sometimes it takes a while to get some momentum, but right away from the start.
And we talked so much during the week, it was unbelievable. But Buddy and I, because we had to, because preparation and everything. Let me also mention that I'm a firm believer that you have to have very good people around you if you want to be successful. Any endeavor. And I talked about these executives. We had great camera people.
Absolutely.
And Ronnie Carkett started as actually, he might have been our longtime director, but we had, I think, Dave Calabrese, who worked up there, might have been our first director. All right, you have to have a great crew. And they were serious. They were going to, when they were making the change of announcers, they were also, it's just sitting in on these meetings, I knew they were committed.
Right.
They were committed to putting a good product. And here's the other thing I want to say that makes and I should never forget this. Buddy's son, Brad,
Right.
who went on to star at Amity High School, and he would put Buddy and I to shame when we had breaks if we made mistakes. He was my spotter, and I want to tell you something. If you're doing play-by, especially doing the television, well, both radio and television, I always had a spotter. Brad Chernovitz was one of the best spotters I ever had. So that's, you really need a full complement of people.
Right. Can't just take two of you.
Right.
Right. Now, 85 season, you mentioned Liz Kennard. I don't think people really realize the genius of that lady because so many things she implemented as the years went on. You had the Valley kickoff before the season that started. Right. She started doing like the special features where Buddy would do coaches tips or I think it was a rule book or something like that to that effect.
A fantastic series.
Right.
Fantastic series.
And I mean, the replays and how she would have cameramen go. If you guys were covering Shelton and Derby, she would send a camera crew to Ansonia and Naugatuck so people could see the games back then. And what people don't realize is she really committed herself not just to bring people these games, but she was doing something great for these high school kids because ultimately they're the ones playing the games. They're the ones, hitting heads and stuff like that. And she gave them, some press that they probably would not get other than in the papers.
And let me also say this about Liz. She also had to deal with some of the coaches.
Yeah, that's not easy sometimes.
Because, because some of the coaches were maybe concerned that maybe some of the other high school teams would be using the tapes. They were concerned about other teams getting an unfair advantage. And just one story, because Liz also inaugurated the player of the game.
Yes, which was very nice.
And also
a wonderful thing.
Giving the plaque, giving the jersey. Well, Bob Riggio, you got to love Bob. Bob Riggio was coaching Shelton at the time, and he was a little concerned about that. Liz actually had, the time that Liz had to spend on the phone, making sure, that Bob understood that, this was a very nominal thing.
Right.
And everything was to promote the Bob was really concerned. He did not want this to get out of hand a little bit. So it was, she every year she wanted to do something different. She didn't stand pat.
Right.
As you said, Buddy series. And I did something, I think the first years, similar to what.
And your halftime shows too. You would interview a lot of different people. Which was really good. Correct.
What happened there is that they were interviewed before the start of the game,
right?
And then they would be inserted in the halftime,
right?
I also did a similar to, and by the way, congratulations, because on your first Derby High School Hall of Fame, your Sports Hall of Fame.
Thank you.
And similar to what you did, one of my features that I had to do, right, we try to have a series of, like, where are they now? Former players in the Valley.
Right.
And we really didn't have the tape to accompany.
We didn't have like a hero's salute, right? Or something.
I don't remember the exact name.
That was really nice to see.
But talking about the bunny basics of Derby, Gene Smalls of Ansonia.
Right.
And Seymour and the great Shelton players and Seymour players and so forth. Now, this was that was my little feature at the beginning. As they say, Buddy's feature I think was the best. There's no question about it. The coaches' features and
right.
And even camera work. Excuse me, Liz was always, from a technical standpoint, she always wanted us to get better.
Right.
So.
And you know what I liked about Liz, too, is Liz didn't just give coverage to the football players. You had pom-poms that would go out there at the half, and she would have that whole halftime show devoted to those pom-poms.
Correct.
So she didn't just she gave kids, in that sport, whatever their role was, a player, a pom-pom, a cheerleader, whatever. She always made sure that, the camera showed them at times. And I really thought that, she was tremendous for high school, kids in general.
She was very well aware of the whole of being for high school, not only athletes, but the whole picture of of
Right.
being in high school and all the things that go along with sports. Even with Naugatuck, when we covered Naugatuck, people here, I'm sure, realize that Naugatuck has had outstanding bands for years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We made sure, I was sometimes in touch with the band leader. I would get information before the game. So before that particular game, if we were doing a Naugatuck game, of course, and we covered like the Naugatuck band at halftime or something. So
Right.
it wasn't just football. Liz also, from time to time, I guess she was threatening me with probably doing some. I never ended up by doing a soccer game,
Really?
but she. But
I know she tried a basketball game once.
Yes, she did. Matter of fact, I worked with one of the Walshes,
Probably
Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It could be Jimmy, but I think it was probably Jack.
We were over
Yeah.
at Shelton High School. That's obviously that's a different season. It's not the football season, but she was always trying to bring in the other sports. As I say, maybe someone else did the soccer games, but I was actually, Mike, to tell you the truth, I was saying, my goodness, I got to study up. I didn't really know soccer.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So I was almost saying I have to get to a book or something like that. And I actually went to some games. I went to some Seymour soccer games with the thought being that maybe we would do soccer. But thank goodness,
Right. And, you mentioned that you didn't know soccer.
No, not really.
The other thing is, a lot of the camera crew, I know, weren't really sports fans. So the coverage they gave, not being sports fans, was tremendous.
Absolutely.
It just goes to show that they had a passion for video and stuff like that, and they gave you the best possible coverage, because that's not easy to do either, because it's easy for you and I to talk because we love sports, but it's not easy for people to cover it who are not necessarily sports fans, and I just thought that stood out about them too.
And it was because we never did a live game, but although I understand that we had the technical capacity to do the games live, but we
Right.
never did. Now, of course, Valley at that time was Telemedia. First it was Valley Cablevision, then Telemedia. They did election coverage, obviously live. That's
Right.
That's a different situation. But while we didn't do it live, and I want to compliment the Ron Carcutt's and the other technical people that I saw what they did after the game when they got the raw footage. How they
Right.
had to go back to the studio. The editing involved.
That's not easy, yeah.
It's not easy at all. So-
And there were days you guys had rainouts, and you would do a game on a Sunday afternoon, and by Sunday night the game was still on the air that night.
Correct.
So they had to hustle. If Derby played Ansonia on a Sunday afternoon at 1:30 and that game ended, say,
Yep.
4:30, there wasn't a lot of time to get that game ready for 7, but they would do it. I mean, they were phenomenal at what they did, and I mean, it's why everything worked so well.
When I talk about editing, when the name I sort of blacked out on, it was Greg Kashuba also worked with Ronnie Karka, and they
Right.
and they did the editing. So it was quite a task.
Right. Some of the there was always some, comedic moments on your telecast, and Buddy was hilarious a lot of times because Buddy was very honest. He didn't pull any punches. He didn't sugarcoat anything. And I always felt like, you two were you two would feed off each other very well with that. But I mean, I think people don't realize too just how good he was as a color commentator, because
Absolutely.
he knew football. He knew it in and out, and he could tell what they were running every time, and he'd tell you what they ran, what the guard did, what the tackle did. I mean, he was just great. He really was.
Well, let me, if I could, I'll give you one other story too. And Buddy would call me. I was vanilla because all I did was, but my job is to just describe what's, if I'm a really strict, maybe I'm also a strict constitutionalist too. Okay.
Right.
And if I'm doing the games, my job is it's not to give my opinion.
Right.
It's really to describe what's happening. It's the commentator's job to offer some context to the game, to give the opinion. Just one story, and I'll never forget this. Buddy was a little critical, and this was going back to Shelton Bob Ridge. Bob and Buddy, they really smoothed things out later on. But there was a time there where Buddy might have made some comments that Bob did not like or something like
Right.
that. So we're doing a Shelton game now. Buddy signs off, and we sign off, and Buddy. It had something to do with the player of the game, but it was a negative. Buddy had a negative comment to make about Shelton. All right, anyway, so fine. But I'm not. But Buddy's doing his job.
Right.
Buddy has no
allegiance to anybody.
No allegiance, right. and really he could. He's a straight arrow himself. He's just he has nothing against any coaches. The reason I'm bringing this up, the next week, believe it or not, we had a terrible game coming up. It was an Ansonia game against Kennedy High School of Waterbury.
Wow.
Now, so I call up the Kennedy coach, and I'm asking for the starting lineups and the roster and so forth, and to try to get the information. So the coach had heard the coach had seen the tape of the game, in which Buddy was critical at the end.
Right.
And the coach did not like, so apparently he didn't like what was said. So he says, all right, I'll give you the starting lineup. And so all he did is he just gave me 11 names.
Oh, really? That was it.
I mean, so I had no cooperation or something like that
Right.
from the gamer, But of course we got through the game. It was
Right.
You're talking about Ansonia Kennedy. It was it was not one of our better games to do, but Buddy was doing what a color commentator is supposed to do.
Right. And let me ask you this. You talked about, Bob Riggio and stuff. That was going to be my next question. You have to get cooperation from the coaches or it doesn't work as well. And it always seemed like you did, because never mind the fact that you would meet with them each week. If you were covering, say Shelton and Seymour, you had to meet with, Coach Sponheimer, Coach Riggio. You had to get, the information you need to get. That's not easy to do. But
No.
the other thing is, too, you talk about, I think the first couple years you guys did Cable 10, you would interview the coaches after the games, and then later on you would do a player at a game.
That's right.
But in both senses, it's not easy to get these people available after the game, because they just want to go to the locker room, or they want to get on the bus. They don't really want to hang around, but you guys were always able to do that. Were the coaches pretty cooperative with you guys over the years?
Yeah, by and large, they were very cooperative. I
Right.
mean, really no complaints. One others. We're talking about cooperation too. Even as a play-by-play announcer, sometimes coaches would. You get a roster at the beginning of the year,
Right.
and then you have you want a certain kind of a roster. You don't want an alphabetical roster. You want a numerical roster. Now remember, I'm working. It's not only that roster I'm working off. I had charts,
Right.
and so I use that roster, when I talk to the coach to get the offense, not only the first team offense and defense, you get the backup. So you do all your
Right.
homework and everything like that. And just a funny story, we're working one Thanksgiving Day game. And Bob, if you're ever listening out here, Bob, I love you. Bob Riggio, great, really a great guy. And
Right.
Charlie and I are on the sidelines. And this is a Derby Shelton game, and we're both laughing because Bob sometimes had a habit of changing numbers
Oh, really?
of players. And Charlie and I'm saying, oh, geez, I wonder, I'm worried about who's that number for Shelton? And Charlie looks at me, yeah, so am I.
Right.
And I'm talking with Charlie because but you get through these things or something, and maybe there were a couple of, I try to impress upon the coaches, listen, if you're going to change the numbers, I'm calling the game.
Right.
Especially it's embarrassing if a kid's running for a touchdown and you have the wrong back.
Right.
Because the number has been changed. So, by and large, everyone was cooperative.
Right. Now, you guys, like I said, you guys did 24 years together, which is unbelievable. I mean, that's right up there with any team. I mean, it's not easy to come week in and week out and do that when you have other jobs too. It's really like a part-time job. It's also a labor of love, obviously. Your relationship was pretty good though between the two of you off the field as well. I mean, you guys look like you were, very complimentary to each other.
Yes. Yeah, we like some. I think we like the same. Even though his son Brad liked the Red Sox.
Right.
Buddy and I think we liked, we liked even some of the same professional teams. We shared a lot of the same interest and so forth. The only thing is that he would always, when we would get into the car after a game, let's say up at Cheshire High School, I remember one time, I don't remember, it might have been Cheshire and Shelton. Buddy would always laugh at me because I couldn't wait to get into the car to listen to the Yukon women's basketball team. he always, but we kidded with one another, and yes, and we were in sync.
Right. Now let me ask you, for you personally, what was more, back then too, like the NFL and college football and all that, you had so much football going on.
Mm-hmm.
As a kid, you get pumped up to watch the NFL, your favorite team, whether it's the Jets, Giants, Cowboys, whoever it might be. Was high school football your first love and then the other sports? I mean, would you get excited on a Sunday, or basically was your first love, high school football?
High school, college, and a distant third, the NFL.
Right. So
and especially as the years have gone by.
Oh, yeah. I'm not crazy about the NFL anymore, but as a kid, I really enjoyed it.
But I really love college football, too.
Right.
We love it.
And, I mean, let me ask you this as well. You guys didn't just cover Valley teams. I mean, you always, devoted a game to a Valley team. So if you were covering Seymour versus Cheshire, you're going to, it's obvious you're devoted to Seymour, but you have to go out and talk to other coaches from those towns, and they're not from the Valley.
Right.
How did that part go? Because that couldn't have been easy at times.
Well, it depended, let's say it depended on, on the individual coach. Most of the time the coaches were, as I said, even on our Hometown Heroes segment last September, most of the coaches were, as long as you called them up and said, listen, I'm such an Ed Clements and I want this information, you can check on my reputation and so forth. They were pretty understanding and they were pretty open. The coaches that were more open actually were the people that had an association with Buddy.
Right.
Because they had known about me through Buddy.
Right.
And but by and large they were, they were cooperative. As long as they knew that, you're not there to do a hatchet job on them.
Right.
And, you're looking for never, ever did I get information from never, ever did I get an information from a school and then go to a Valley school and say, hey, here's what they're going to do.
Right. So
if I had done that, I'm toast.
Right.
I'm toast.
Right. And that wouldn't look good for Cable 10 or
Absolutely.
nobody involved.
You've got to be above board.
Right. Any games that stand out to you that you and Buddy did where you were like, wow, what a great game we saw?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Could I mention one right
Sure.
up?
Yeah.
Wow. Naugatuck Seymour. I don't remember the year. And you said
I think I know what you're talking about. Are you talking about the come from behind victory that Naugatuck had? I believe that was 1990. Yes.
You're the man. I commend you again because of your interest in the past in high school football. I really commend you on it. Your dedication to that. That game up at Naugatuck, where Seymour comes out, and you said 1990?
Right. I think it was 27-6 at one point. Yeah.
Game over.
Right.
Naugatuck had to do everything. See, Naugatuck was not a big play team.
Right.
They weren't going to be like the Ansonia, big play team. Actually, Derby had a certain segment in their history.
Big play team.
Or Chano.
Yeah.
Big play team.
Right.
Naugatuck has to.
They grinded.
They've got to grind it out, which means they can't get penalties. Mike, I'll tell you, the game. You're gonna play. Are you gonna play that? I mean, if that's in the library
at some point, yeah, we probably will.
One of the greatest games ever because Naugatuck just came back. The momentum swung. The points were basically in the fourth. In the fourth quarter.
It was crazy. I mean, and Naugatuck at the time was number 2 in the state. They had that on the line,
And everything had to work right. And and Buddy and I are a lot of times we're in the. At that time, I think we're out I don't think they had the press box then. Right. We might have been out in the stands up at Veterans Field in Naugatuck. But we're just amazed at what happened.
Yeah, that was crazy.
And another story, because Craig Peters would always, Craig would always act as, no, I'm not really watching your games or something.
Right.
Craig would always say
Downplay everything.
That's the word. Downplay it. Say, no, I'm not really into and yeah, okay, you do your job, I appreciate it and so forth, but I'm not really into watching the games. One of his assistant coaches came up to me the following week and said they were all glued to the first airing of that game. That was one of the most exciting times in Naugatuck sports history. One of the great, obviously a great game. Another great game too was the Ansonia Naugatuck game when Steve
94, I believe, the overtime game
with
Ronnie Tate
scoring the touchdown in overtime.
Right, and then Jay Jabina making that sack.
Jason Sabina making the sack. But remember, the play, the double handoff, which I blew as an announcer, but Joey Edmonds.
Yes, great player. Yep.
And Mike, 12,000 people.
It was unbelievable, yeah. Those are games you treasure.
And also, if I could say, before I even did the broadcasting, even radio, I can go way, way back if I can mention the famous Derby-Seymour game down at that time, Ryan Field.
1969, I believe.
Where Derby rallied.
They were down 18-0.
Where Seymour the game's over. I'm just watching.
Right.
Game over. Seymour's a great team, and Derby just comes roaring back in the second half.
Yeah, those were great.
And there's my goodness, I don't mean to slight any other schools or programs. Remember also, you're talking about Valley. I don't want to forget the fact that we were covering, because they were part of our telemedia market, Amity High School.
Right, Woodland.
Because Woodbridge, Bethany, Orange.
Right. Before we wrap up, just real quick, what does it mean to you? I mean, you love radio. You've always said radio has been your favorite thing, but
it still is.
Right. But what does Valley High School sports, Cable 10 mean to you?
Well, it's let's say it's funny thing is you're recognized more in, let's say, in shopping centers. I did 5 years of play-by-play. I ended up by doing, I think it was 5 years at ADS when Brad had moved on and so forth. From radio, no one, you go into, no one really knows you. You do,
right.
You do. So maybe from the standpoint of people staring at you, saying, "Hey, I know that guy,
right?
The cable guy, that kind of." But it's a sense of achievement.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You did something, and above all, I hope I can communicate this. It's about the people.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it.
The Charlie DeCenzos, the Bob Riggios, the Joe Bedan, and I don't want to forget the Paul Sponheimers, the Jack Hunts.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Bobby Lisi's, the Butch Marazi's, Billy Johnson from if I'm forgetting schools or programs, the Craig Peters. I might have had my little battles with certain coaches, but the people, great. I cannot say enough about the people that were entrusted in the care of our high school athletes. These coaches are to be commended. The coaches in the past, anyone that's coaching today, God bless them.
Exactly.
Because it's a whole different ball game too.
No doubt about it. Well, Ed, we're out of time here. We could go on forever, but I really want to thank you for coming on today. And
my pleasure.
I'll just tell you, as somebody who was a fan, those games were so enjoyable for me. And to me, there wasn't a better team than you and Buddy. So thank you again for coming on today.
Mike, you can't thank you enough. Thank you for keeping me sort of relevant, okay?
And that was Ed Clements on episode 2 of Valley Sports Rewind. I'm Mike Cannici saying goodbye, everyone.